This gameplay video is brought to you by very generous patron Shuffles. Drivnod versus Hazezon, Jarad, and Keranos. 4-land, not a particularly great hand. Do I risk a free mulligan? I think I might. Watch us get into no lands. Alright, that's a pleasant surprise. That's actually a better hand, so don't regret the mulligan on that one. We draw into Phyrexian Altar. I'm thinking Bojuka Bog might be useful this game against Jarad and or Hazezon. So we will just get down the swamp here. I'm hoping that we'll be able to draw into more lands off Assigning Blood, which we are likely going for next turn. See a Winding Way from the Golgari player. And hitting the bin, a Copperhoof Vorak and a Brawn. So all their creatures will have trample now, so Bojuka Bog already going to come in handy. Discarding a forest to hand size. A Druid Class from the Naya player. Okay, get into another land, so I'm not as worried about the Assigning Blood anymore, plus the fact that we'd have to discard a card to hand size. So I'll just get down the Zulaport Cutthroat now, just for the sake of getting a card out of our hand. And then next turn we can definitely drop a land and go Assigning Blood without discarding to hand size. Obviously depends on what we actually draw into. Now a Commune with the Gods from the Golgari player. And they reveal the top 5 cards, so that is a Perpetual Timepiece, Fertile Ground, a Torgar, Leyline Prowler, and a Stitch Together. And our opponent chose the Leyline Prowler there. Another enchantment in Cryptolith Rite from the Hazezon player. Missing a 3rd land drop though, which is not the thing that you want to see from a Lands Matter player. Alright, and we get into another land, so yeah, I think we do go for the Assigning Blood here, because obviously it digs us further into our library, and we do want to be seeing ramp. Alright, a Carrion Feeder. Don't think anyone's going to go for a board wipe at this point, but having a Carrion Feeder in play might be useful whilst we don't have the Yaheni available to us. So get that into play, drew into a Reassembling Skeleton as well. So swing the Zulaport Cutthroat straight down the middle. I'll start spreading the damage around with that thing. The Monarchy being introduced via Emberwild Captain. So Keranos did draw a card at the end of the turn there, 6 cards in hand, ending the turn with. The Leyline Prowler our opponent grabbed before is now coming into play on turn 4. Still no land from Hazezon, unfortunately. Alright, and glad we went for the card draw previously, because it did get us closer to ramp. I think I will continue to hold off on the Bojuka Bog as long as I can. So we'll get down a swamp, into the Sol Ring. And then I think we're best holding off on Wretched Confluence as long as we can. Might be able to fish creatures out of the bin with that, so just get down our commander here, although I don't think there's too much use for it at the moment. And I'll swing in both of my creatures at the Naya player. We see from the Izzet player a copy artifact, which does copy our Sol Ring. So we can get that down before the commander, and Keranos, God of Storms, does enter the fray. Yeah, and that's what I was worried about with regards to getting my commander down. The Massacre Girl comes into play, so sacrifice the Zulaport Cutthroat, and that will be a plus counter on the Carrion Feeder, and that means that we should have our stuff survive here. Obviously Zulaport Cutthroat triggers twice thanks to the commander, so everything gets -1/-1, and then yeah, we managed to dodge the chaining off of the Massacre Girl. Seeing another land, our opponent has stuck it out thankfully, and it is a desert as well. It would be good, we've got snow lands. It'd be good if we had desert basics as well for decks like this. Anyway, the Springbloom Druid being played and sacrificing the desert to introduce some more basics, and a life is gained for each of that landfall. Alright, so let's see what we draw here. That is a Meat Hut Massacre, which could come in handy. I'm thinking we go for the Wretched Confluence. We can get rid of this thing and the Massacre Girl, and then wipe the Massacre Girl from the bin with the Bojuka Bog. It does mean putting all the removal into Wretched Confluence and no card draw, which I do typically like to use, but I think that's fine here. Could bring back the Zulaport Cutthroat back to hand with the Wretched Confluence as well, but I just don't like what our opponent will be able to do with Massacre Girls, so -2/-2 twice, and 1 on here as well. Then play out the Bojuka Bog, and that can exile this player's graveyard. And as much as I'd love to swing in with the Drivnod here, I think we're holding back our opponents in taking the Monarch away from us, so just go with the Carrion Feeder, which can't block of course. successfully stealing away the monarchs, so we draw a card at the end of the turn. Alright, and there's another sack outlet in the Viscera Seer, so getting all of our setup pieces quite nicely. But there's a 3 damage to any target, so Keranos probably goes after the Drivnod. Alright, instead it goes for us directly. Alright, and going for a board wipe anyway, so chain reaction, going to wipe everything out here. Well, we get to keep the monarch at least. I will return the commander back to the command zone. And the Izzet player with 4 cards in hand throws out a Teferi's Ageless Insight as well. Reclamation Sage into play. I'd be throwing it at this personally. I think we should be targeting the Keranos at this point, to be honest. And Rex Sage does go after the enchantment. Hazezon, Shaper of Sand out after the first board wipe. And throwing out the Desert from the graveyard, Grasping Dunes. Alright, and there's an Ophiomancer, which be good with something like a Zulaport Cutthroat. I mean, the problem is our opponent's just going to keep bolting things out of the way with Keranos, so I'm wondering if it's worth doing maybe just set up with your Henny and a Reassembling Skeleton here. So we'll get out the Reassembling Skeleton and we'll have the mana held up for being able to reanimate it. And in the interest of us ganging up on the Keranos, I will swing in with the Henny. And then at the end of the turn we draw into Kakusho, which is more of a payoff piece with our commander, so glad to see that one. Some protection for our commander would be good, and of course the Keranos would have been safe to get down our commander because that just draws a card. A Court of Ire will take the monarchy away. Jarad now throwing out a Stag Beetle. X plus counters on it, where X is the number of other creatures on the battlefield. So could sacrifice the Reassembling Skeleton to that, but I don't think it really matters. Alright, and for some reason the Reclamation Sage decided not to take the monarchy over here. I wouldn't have thought... I mean, even if you end up taking some damage from the Sand Warriors going wide on you to take the monarchy, you're still worth drawing the extra card, I think. One Sand Warrior going in towards Keranos. Not sure why the commander's been held back. Then casting a 3 visits after combat and successfully taking the monarch away. And now we see a Scape Shift from our opponent, so yeah, could go off here. Sacrificing all of his lands. Alright, so plenty of deserts coming into play now. Ramunap Ruins. Yavimaya is not a desert, but it will fix green mana. Survivor's Encampment, Sun-Scorched Desert, Cradle of the Accursed, and Field of the Dead. Luckily for us, they are 1 land away from triggering Field of the Dead, otherwise they would have got a bunch of zombies out there. They will get some Sand Warrior tokens though, thanks to having the commander in play. And then the Sun-Scorched Desert is going to deal 1 damage to us. And then a Grasping Dunes from our opponent, playing that from the graveyard, so I assume he doesn't have a land in hand that he could have made, because he could have played that into the Scape Shift and triggered the Field of the Dead a bunch. Anyway, triggering that for the first time here. And then tapping down the creatures for a total of 3 mana. That is a Hammer of Perforos, giving creatures haste, which means they will be able to tap for mana here, thanks to the Cryptolith Rite, putting the Druid class up to level 2, so you can play an additional land on each of your turns. Then playing a Zendikar's Royal. And now we see a Crucible of Worlds, can play any land from the bin with that. So they do have another land drop to make here, and plenty of lands in the bin thanks to that Scape Shift. And playing a Snow-Covered Mountain, so triggering Field. The Zendikar's Royal will make another token. Okay, and they decide to pass at that with 3 mana held up at the moment. They do draw a card at the end of the turn thanks to the Monarch. So at the end of the turn we'll sacrifice the Reassembling Skeleton, might as well put a plus counter on our Yahenni. Alright, there is a Grim Haruspex for us. Could go for that. Maybe try and buff the Yahenni up a bunch here. Get rid of all these Sand Warrior tokens. Yeah, unfortunately we can't go for 2 mana into X on the Massacre, because that would take out the Yahenni, and Indestructible doesn't help us there. So we might as well go for the Grim Haruspex, I think. So we'll just put 1 into X on the Meat Hook Massacre. And we might as well sacrifice the Reassembling Skeleton to give our Yahenni Indestructible here, because we're going to lose that anyway. So each opponent loses a life to the Meat Hook Massacre. Grim Haruspex will draw us a card. Alright, and we draw into a land. So there we are going to gain a bunch of life to the Meat Hook Massacre. We get rid of the Reclamation Sage and a bunch of Sand Warriors. And Yahenni is going to get buffed massively here. Alright, so Yahenni ends up at a 14-14. We end up at 49 life. And we'll go through to the attack phase here. Want to swing in at the Keranos. Looks like he's got something for us. I'd rather force him to use it. And that is a cryptic command, returning that to our hand. I'm guessing they're drawing a card there as well. Yeah, drawing a card and bouncing a permanent, which I'm glad to see the back of. So then we can go for a land and just hold up the mana, I think, but we're just holding up the reassembling skeleton. Not that our opponents know that. So the Court of Ire is going to deal 2 damage to any target, which is probably going to be our Grim Harry specs, and it is. And it's 3 damage from the Keranos. So I would hope it would go over here, and it is going on the Hazezon. So again, I'm hoping that our opponents are realising that we should be looking over at the Keranos player, but maybe the desert player over here isn't too happy with us still. Bribery, searching our library for a big scary creature. And they've searched up a Massacre Worm, so going to continue to trigger our Meat Hut Massacre for us. Also, Massacre Worm will trigger 3 times from killing off 3 creatures, so 6 life, sending the Hazezon down to 41. We end up at 53. A Mortivore from Jarad, which is an 8/8, can regenerate for a single black. Alright, and Stag Beetle deciding to take the monarchy away from the Naya player. I'd be offering up the trade against the Massacre Worm personally and trying to get some damage through to the Izzet player. The longer the game goes on against Keranos, the worse it's going to be for us. A plane's been thrown out for the Naya player, so gain a life, make a couple of tokens. The commander entering play again as well. Then we see an Aura Shards. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing the back of this, but all the artifacts and enchantments are going to be wiped out to that thing. They did get down a desert there, so that is 4 things being blown up. There'll be 2 tokens here, and then an elemental and a Field of the Dead token as well. So they do go for the Court of Ire. Likely go after our Meat Hut Massacre as well. No, going after the Soul Ring, so recognising the Izzet player as a threat is good. Oh, it mustn't have been a desert. It's a Scorched Ruins. Yeah, they do have deserts available to them. They must have sacrificed the Raminap Ruins at some point, but deciding against playing that for whatever reason. And then we are taking some commander damage. Yeah, okay. Not swinging in at the Keranos at all. Must be wanting to hold up mana with the tokens. And then our opponent goes through to the end step, so we'll reanimate the reassembling skeletons again. Alright, and a Bloodghast for us, so we've got plenty of means of sacrificing and sack fodder, stuff like that. Struggling a little bit on mana. I think it's time to just get down the Kakusho and start threatening some good plays with that. So throw down Kakusho. We will also go for a sack outlet in the Viscera Seer, and if that goes down to a lightning bolt, then so be it. I think there's better targets for Keranos' lightning bolt than our Viscera Seer. It is a lightning bolt for Keranos, so I think it should definitely be going on the Hazezon. Alright, it instead goes onto the Kakusho. I mean, maybe Hazezon isn't much of a threat to Keranos now that the enchantments and artifacts have gone down. Could be an Anger of the Gods or something from our opponent. Like 2 or 3 damage to all creatures, and that's why they went on the Kakusho. Alright, Phyrexian Metamorph. So we're losing life here either way. Might as well get some scries out of it. See if we can get closer to some answers to actually do something this game, because Keranos is just grinding the game to a halt. Alright, I'll land on top. If we're going to lose the Soul Ring, then it might be worth going for that, unfortunately. We'll have 4, 5, 6, 7 mana next turn, which is enough for our commander, but I don't really see the point in playing our commander, to be honest. Maybe getting close to some card draw would be better. Sack the Kakusho for a scry as well. So each opponent loses a life to the Meat Hut Massacre, and each opponent will be drained for 5 to Kakusho as well. Alright, another land on top, so we'll put that on the bottom as well. And then sacrifice the Viscera Seer to its own ability. So Meat Hut Massacre doing some work, even though we didn't optimise the amount of damage it could have done previously. Pawn of Ulamog. Don't really fancy that either, just some means of decent card draw would be good. So with the 2 Massacre Worms in play, we stay at 55, but the Hazezon goes plummeting down to 13, and that will continue to happen as long as the board wipes keep occurring and all the tokens are still in play. And then, yeah, the Massacre Worm swings in over there for 6 damage as well. Keranos looking to get rid of this player as soon as possible. So I wonder if this is going to get Hazezon's attention now. Alright, Jarad going straight through to combat here. I would definitely be forcing the issue against this player. He said taking out Hazezon. Maybe Jarad fancies his odds of being able to just throw damage straight at the Keranos player. Maybe that's what the idea is. Hazezon going down before damage occurs. Anyway, Bone Horde into play now. We've got quite a few creatures in the graveyard thanks to all these bits of control from our opponents. So that is a 9/9, as is the Mortivore, of course. Alright, we cleared 3 lands off the top with the Viscera Seer, and there's a 4th one. So throw that into play, and then we might as well throw down the Yaheni, get out Ophiomancer as well, and then I think we're just getting out the reassembling skeleton at the end of our opponent's turn again. Yeah, nothing to do here. Just wait for the lightning bolt from Keranos. Pretty unlucky that we had 4 lands on the top. Ophiomancer triggering for the first time will get a Death Touching Snake. It's card draw from Keranos. So beginning the turn with 7 cards in hand, drops a mountain. Now we see a Spell Twine. That is going to go on our Wretched Confluence. Over here is a Bribery, and there's nothing from the Jarad player. Bribery being pointed at the Jarad this time. Probably best to take creatures from multiple players, because as soon as I get taken out or scoop, I'll take this Massacre Worm with me. The Ophiomancer being dealt with immediately, as we assumed it would be. So might as well sacrifice it to Yaheni to give that indestructible. They're returning a creature to hand with that as well, the Emberwild Captain. So I'm guessing they're going to draw a card as well. Each opponent loses a life because a creature we control dies, but then we lose 4 life to the Massacre Worm. Deciding on a Sir Conrad the Grim, so there's going to be some aristocrat stuff going off this game apparently. No attacks occurring from the Izzet player, which is probably the right move. Death's Presence from Jarad. So Jarad's slowly setting up over there and could sneak out a victory if Keranos doesn't do anything about it, but 7 cards in hand likely has counter magic backup. And then just passing through to the end step without any attacks, so both of our opponents playing very passively here and just slowly setting themselves up. Okay, there's a Plumb the Forbidden, so yeah, that could come in handy. We could just continue to set up as our opponents are doing, and then at the end of this turn try a Plumb the Forbidden. It will make multiple copies, so Keranos shouldn't be able to counter all of them. That means that we want the Bloodghast in play, and then we might as well get down the Phyrexian Altar as well. Don't have any hope for actually sticking our commander, unfortunately, which seems to be quite a common occurrence with Drivnod. So we're just looking to draw at least 4 cards at the end of our opponent's turn. Keranos dodging the lightning bolt again, and it is card draw once more. Keranos throwing out his own Soul Ring this time. And throwing out the Emberwild Captain to grab hold of the Monarchy again. Massacre Worm deciding to swing in this time. This time against the Golgari player. So Mortivore just being thrown in the way of that. This seems like pretty obvious bait to me, but we'll see what happens. Don't see why the Izzet player would want to give us this back. Probably burn on the Mortivore, I would think. No, it is an Arc Bond. Whenever that creature is dealt damage this turn, it deals that much damage to each other creature and each player. So our opponent falling for that. And it's going to be 8 damage on each creature here, so I think I'm going to let go of the Yaheni for the sake of drawing more cards. We'll wait for everything to go on the stack first. Suppose we could go for Yaheni surviving here if we sacrifice the reassembling skeleton, reanimate it, ready to get rid of it with Plumb the Forbidden. That could be a play. Our Massacre Worm dies there, so a plus counter goes onto the Yaheni, and we do gain a life as well. So might as well do that plan of sack the reassembling skeleton. That will trigger the Sir Conrad and the remaining Massacre Worm, and each of our opponent will lose a life to our Meat Hut Massacre. And get the skeletons back into play again. So now with the 8 damage about to go on us and all of the creatures, we'll go for an attempt on Plumb the Forbidden. Going to leave the indestructible Yaheni in play because it might be of use to us throughout the course of the game. It is about to get bigger from everything getting blown up. Just have to try and dodge counter magic. 5 cards in the Keranos' hand. So Conrad and the Massacre Worm going to continue to ping away at us. Noteworthy that all of this is during the damage phase, which is why Plumb the Forbidden is so good as an instant speed card draw spell. Still don't see enough of this thing. We are ticking down the Is It player though, thanks to this Meat Hut Massacre. Can't believe how much work it's done over the course of the game. Oftentimes it's worth just having down as a 2-mana enchantment. Plumb the Forbidden copied 3 times, so it looks like we are going to get 4 cards for 4 life here. And there's a Vamp Tutor. See a land and a Volrath Stronghold as well, so likely going for Vamp Tutor during the upkeep. Alright, and another land in high market, so yeah, glad we got the Vamp Tutor there. The Massacre Worm and Sir Conrad doing some work. We end up down at 28 from 50 odd. And Yahenni, about to get a bunch of plus counters on it. We gain more life from the Meat Hut Massacre. And the Phyrexian Germ token being buffed up to a 16/16 with 8 damage markers on it. Noteworthy that the Death's Presence is going to be relevant as well. So it could be that we see the back of the Keranos after all here. So we see a couple of Death's Presence triggers on the stack. The first one is 11 counters and then a further 6, so that's now a 33/33, can probably deal with us, yeah. We are of course at 33. So I think all our opponent has to do next turn is, that'll be 4, 5, 6 and 7 mana, which they do have. All they have to do is swing in at the Keranos with this, and then throw it at us with their commander. Our Yahenni ending up at an 8/8. And the Keranos player with 7 life ends up at 6 cards in hand thanks to the Monarch. So we'll see if the Jarad gets countered at this point. If I was my opponent, I'd swing straight through with this at the Is It player and hope that they don't have a bounce spell. Because there's not likely anything we are going to do about a Jarad coming into play, but it could be countered because he's left the blue player available. So we'll see if that manages to land. No, it doesn't, gets through the blue player, so for all the card draw, surprisingly didn't get into any counter magic. Maybe it's not that type of deck. They seem to be wanting to play our cards against us, so maybe one of the blue decks that doesn't have too much counter magic, which I appreciate if it is the case. Still have to dodge a bounce for the Germ token though, assuming this swings in over here. So the Jarad's sacrificing the token now before combat. We gain a life and get a plus counter on the Yahenni. Ultimately all we have to do is sacrifice the Yahenni to the Phyrexian Altar and they go down. Where is this pointed? Oh, it's each opponent. I thought you had to point this at someone. Alright, so, well, we just have to sacrifice this then. And we'll take the Jarad Golgari Lichlord trigger off the stack. And now it's pretty safe to say that the Is It player doesn't have counter magic, otherwise he would have countered the Jarad, I like to think. So that takes that off the stack. We'll gain a life from the Meat Hut Massacre. And we're looking like we're in alright position here. Obviously, depends on whether or not this player can actually do something to us. So we'll challenge them to not have a counter magic for the Vamp Tutor. And apparently he doesn't now. What do we go for here? I don't have any mass reanimation in here, like I usually would in a mono black deck, because I don't want to be typical with all my deck building, but that does mean that a lot of my decks aren't optimal because of that playing decision. So maybe we just go for Junji. Yeah, we can't use Junji to bring back the Kakusho annoyingly. So maybe it's just Skull Clamp then? We can try and outvalue our opponent. Screw it, we'll do that. We've got the Bloodghast in our graveyard as well as the Reassembling Skeleton. Yeah, Mass Reanimation or something like that would have been the best there, but obviously, like I said, I'm not going for the absolute optimal plays with decks all the time. So we'll play Volrath's Stronghold, then I can put Kakusho on top of the library. That triggers the Bloodghast. It does have haste because our opponent's life total is 10 or less. So we'll swing straight through at our opponent here. We'll take the Monarchy away from our opponent here as well. So managing to hit our opponent, we take the Monarchy away, they go down to 4. So then we can just get out the Reassembling Skeleton. Don't see that there's much point in going for our commander at this point, annoyingly, because we do want to hold up the Volrath Stronghold to grab the Kakusho back. Floating mana goes for Skull Clamp. And this will pull double duty, it will refill our hand, and it will continue to ping away at our opponent. Obviously this will be 4 cards being drawn if we manage to stick our commander at any point. Our opponent holding up priority, but just deciding to allow this to happen. Could get our opponent now actually, I think, if we can afford to play the Reassembling Skeleton a few more times, which we can just sacrifice it to the Meat Hut Massacre, can't we? Or to the Phyrexian Altar triggering the Meat Hut Massacre. So we'll just go for the card draw while we can. We can go Volrath Stronghold during our upkeep if we need to. Might as well draw the cards while we can. Doesn't look like our opponent's going to do anything about this though. Alright, getting to some awesome draws in Yawgmoth and the Sir Conrad. Reassembling Skeleton and Meat Hook Massacre done a lot of work for us this game. Clamp on the skeleton, and we've got enough mana to reanimate the skeleton again, which is all we need. So do it for the final time. Drew into Commander's Plate and a Black Market. Commander's Plate we could have done with a long time ago, would have kept our commander in play. Sacrifice the Reassembling Skeleton, and that's our opponent done. Big thank you to all 3 of my opponents for not scooping early. I did ask in the lobby not to do that, and they all honoured that request, so big thank you to them for that. Yeah, the Drivnod, having 8 power is really nice, but the 3 toughness on it makes it really, really fragile. I'd almost rather it was like a 6-4, something like that. A 5-5 for 5 mana would be really excellent, but yeah, an 8-3 makes it too delicate for my liking. It's a real shame. Big thank you to my opponents again for playing all the way through. And a big thank you to all of you for watching as well. If you do enjoy the content, then please consider donating on Patreon via the link in the description below. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.